this idea of you're personally attacking me, that whole idea and concept is an idea that has now evolved into, look, you're not just personally attacking me, but you're engaged in totally unacceptable and reprehensible activity because you hold a view different from me. That's reprehensible, that's unacceptable, that's criminal, that's insane. We don't want you to be a part of this social order anymore. We don't want you, eventually what is going to happen is that the people who are in government are going to say, okay, we're a protected class and everybody who's outside of government is committing a crime. Anything you do is going to be construed as criminal behavior unless you are a ward of the state and you're on welfare permanently and you're getting exactly the money they want you to get, living where they want you to be, and living the life of a serf or a peon in some kind of a very small apartment over the train tracks where you work. Everything else that you do is going to be considered criminal activity because they have no idea what it means to be in business, to be an entrepreneur, to start a company, to engage in contracts, to do things for a profit, where you add value to a natural resource, and that value becomes attractive to somebody else who's willing to engage in a voluntary transaction to pay you for the value that you added to the product, right? That's all capitalism. Well, capitalism has been denigrated, has been demonized, and anything that is non-government is considered anathema. And so you have the government and everybody else is a criminal unless they are totally 100% enslaved. And so this is what thinking is. And to think that no one has a heart for the First Amendment, it's like, no. I support the First Amendment to some degree, except you can't use this word, you can't use this word, you can't use this, you can't say that, and don't ever appear in public with like a MAGA hat on or something like this. And if you do, we reserve the right to throw Coke in your face, punch you in the face with our fist, kick you, knock you down, and have 3 or 4 of our friends beat you up. All for speech, right? For political speech. So the First Amendment, I would say a good percentage, probably something like 24, 25% of the people in this country no longer favor the First Amendment at all. They don't want a robust free marketplace of ideas. They want a totally controlled marketplace where people are forced to walk lockstep in the same thinking, the same idea. Don't anybody step out of bounds. And ultimately that will be controlled with a social credit system. You say the wrong word, oh, you're sanctioned. You think the wrong idea, oh, you're sanctioned. You even look like you think the wrong idea. You could end up in a camp, right? And so the First Amendment has been abandoned by these hard radicals. They don't want the First Amendment. The Second Amendment, of course, the right to bear arms, is under direct attack. Most of the Democrats want that Second Amendment gone. They want all of the firearms in this country seized, and they want everybody in this country, the only people that will have firearms will be them. And they'll be sticking their firearms in your face, telling you how much money you can make, how much food you can eat, how much electricity you can use, whether or not you can travel, all of those kinds of things. And all of these things are coming very, very quickly because Sodom controls the country. This place has become Sodom. And people can say, oh, no, we're still the greatest country on earth and blah, 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 blah. Well, it doesn't change the fact that we're Sodom. All right, let's continue. Let's talk about this covenant, right? So in our next slide here, slide 9, we see here in Deuteronomy 5:22, very important passage. This follows the delivery of the 10 Commandments, and this passage is written. These words Yahweh spoke unto all your assembly in the mount out of the midst of the fire, of the cloud, and of the thick darkness with a great voice, and he added no more. Okay, that's an extremely important point. And he wrote them on 2 sapphire stones and delivered them unto me. So what you have here is you have an oral or verbal delivery of these words, these 10 commandments. Then he went on to write them himself on these sapphire stones and to present them to Moshe and say, here you go. So you had the oral and the written, and it was the words of Yahweh himself that were spoken, that he himself spoke, and that were written. Now, if he wanted to write 613 mitzvot, he could have done it. He has all the time in the world, and I'm sure he can write at any speed he'd like to write. The creator of the universe can write at any speed he wants to write. But he saw fit that these 10 devarim were sufficient to govern the activities of mankind. You know, there was an economist in the 80s, Milton Friedman, and he wrote this statute for the Securities Exchange Commission, 10b-5 it's called, 10b-5. And 10b-5 says this: thou shalt not commit fraud. Okay? Now, there was a huge debate. Well, don't you think you should define thou shalt and, and the word not, and that we could talk about what fraud is? Let's get some love. And Friedman said, no. Let's just take that statute, stick it right there. Here's the main concept. You guys develop it from here, right? I'll plant the seed. You guys let the tree grow. This is exactly what Yah did. He gives us these commands. These commands are very clear. They're very clear. And people, when they hear these commands, are convicted in their heart. They know these commands are true. And these commands are not just commands. These are not just proscriptions, but they're also the fundamental roster of human rights. You know, you don't get any human right out of a Noahide law, but you get a human right out of the command, thou shalt not kill. That's where you get your right to life. You get your right to property from the command, thou shalt not steal. You see? And so these things become very, very important in terms of the value of this particular covenant. Now, this covenant is the root covenant that Yah gives us. Let's move on to slide 10. So we must distinguish now between the Torah of Moshe and the Torah or the covenant of Yahweh. For these words were spoken by Yahweh to the whole of the house of Yasharel and all of those who sojourned with them at the camp at Horeb. And these were the words which he himself wrote on the 2 stones and delivered them to Moshe. These words, the 10 devarim, these are the Torah of Yahweh. Now, we're going to see how this Torah is going to fit in ever greater, right? This does not diminish the Torah of Moshe. But the thing with the Torah of Moshe is that you have this passage when the Messiah is talking to the Pharisees, or it might have been the Sadducees, and they approached him and they said, look, Rabbi, we got a question for you. If this woman marries a guy and he dies, and she marries his brother and he dies, she marries his brother and he dies, and they go down this roster of 7, right? And I said, blah, 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 blah. Whose wife is she in heaven? And he says, you greatly err. And then he quotes something from the book of Hanok. And he says, you greatly err because we will be like angels in heaven with no husbands and wife. There is no marriage in heaven. That came out of the book of Hanok, by the way. But then they ask him, well, what about Moshe? Moshe suffered to give us a certificate of divorce. And Mashiach says to them, look, I tell you the truth. Moshe suffered to give you a certificate of divorce because of the hardness of your heart. But I tell you that in the beginning, it was not so. So what the Mashiach is saying is that there was a Torah that preceded Moshe, that Moshe overwrote. Moshe overwrote it. And why did he overwrite this paradise Torah? Because of the hardness of the hearts of Yasharel. Now, there is a book out there. It's called The Ascent of James. Okay. Now, The Ascent of James is a portion of Clement's recognitions, but this particular book, Ascent of James, is a very small portion that is highly credible. There have been many, many experts who have looked at these sets of passages and have said, this is a bona fide work. It's a very structured work, and it's a substantiated work historically. We're going to be printing this Ascent of James. It's going to be added to the book Chavot, which we hope to be releasing in April, the book Chavot. And the book Chavot will have the Apocalypse of Peter, the Shepherd of Hermas, the letters of Irenaeus, letters of Clement, the martyrdom of Polycarp, and the 3 Gospels of Nicodemus, Miriam, and Yaakov. Plus, it's going to have the Acts of Mark, and it's going to have the Ascent of James. And the Ascent of James, they talk about, this is people testifying from it, Caiaphas, and they talk about exactly these elements. They talk about exactly these elements, that what happened was when Moshe came down from the mountain initially with the 10 Devarim, and he sees that Aaron had crafted a golden bull and that the people had already fallen back into their Egyptian idolatry. And he was only gone 40 days. They had fallen back into their Egyptian idolatry. That he realized he had to give a set of instructions that was going to take these people out of Egypt so that they might be able to enter the Adamah Kodesh. Ultimately, he could not take the stench of Egypt out of those people that left Egypt with him. When the people say, Moshe, what have you done? You've taken us out here to die in the wilderness. Actually, that's exactly what he did. All but two, Moshe took out to die in the wilderness, and they did in fact die in the wilderness. It was only their children that crossed the Yarden into the Adamah Kodesh, because they could not get the stench of Egypt out of their nostrils. That stench included the smell of human flesh burning in the human sacrifices. That was part of that practice back in that time. And there are historians that agree with me that they were engaged in Canaanite practices in Egypt, and the Canaanites were in fact doing human sacrifices and cannibalism. There's other indicia in scripture that this was the case as well.